This country was established by people who were brave and courageous, and we just need to find that within each and every one of ourselves to make sure that we pass on a better country.
Hi, I'm Sawyer Smith at the National Center for Policy Analysis in Dallas, Texas today, here to speak with the Executive Director, Alan West.
Good to be with you, Sawyer.
Well, thank you. Good to see you,
Thanks.
sir.
Yeah.
Well, you've served 20 plus years in the military.
Yeah.
As a veteran, as a former U.S. Congressman, you've been on both sides of foreign affairs. Let's start talking about the most obvious problem we're facing afar today, Islamic terrorism, and what to do about ISIS.
Well, without a doubt, and it's so good to be with you. I mean, the fact that I'm sitting here being interviewed by one of the former interns we had in our congressional office back in Florida, it really warms my heart. And anytime I can help you out with your endeavor here, you let me know. But when I look at what has happened, it's not just these non-state, non-uniform belligerents, these unlawful enemy combatants, the Islamic jihadism, and how it has grown globally. From West Africa with Boko Haram, Al Qaeda has metastasized, and now you have Al Qaeda in Maghreb, Ansar al-Sharia, you have Al Shabaab. Then you move over into the Middle East. Of course, you've got the Muslim Brotherhood. You have Islamic Jihad, Al-Quds, Al-Aqsa Martyrs, Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, Taliban. I mean, we can go ad nauseum, ad infinitum. The first thing we have to do is to admit that that enemy does exist. And it does not just exist in these regions that are far away, but as we just have seen in Brussels, Belgium, as we have seen in Paris, France, they're within the gates, and we need to take the right type of precautions. So the first thing we need to do is see, how do we deny them sanctuaries in their bases of operation, in the places that we name, Iraq, Syria, Libya, because now, I mean, we had defeated Al Qaeda in Iraq. They have now returned and regenerated themselves as the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. And we continue to, play a game with them called JV team, refer to them as jokers. These are very serious people, and they have learned how to use the social media and websites and information technology. That's another place where we have to deny them sanctuary. I think that another key thing we have to do is cut off their flow of fighters, of material support and resource support. We've got to follow the money, and we've got to cut it off and dry it up. A key thing we have to do as part of understanding and admitting who this enemy is, we've got to win I call it the information operations war, to identify this ideology and to demonize it and really make it so that who would want to be a part of anything that is going out and killing women and children and raping them and enslaving them and crucifying and beheading people. I mean, we have got to get that message out there and really turn the tide against them. So I think that if we can start with those three critical points, it will help us on the way to defeat them. And the bottom line is you just got to crush them.
So you mentioned the Paris terror attacks last year and recently in Brussels. And it seems like Europe is facing some unfortunate consequences because of their open immigration policy. Is it truly unreasonable for the United States to want to pose a temporary ban on unvetted Muslims coming from war-torn places, like you mentioned, Iraq and Syria?
Well, this is what you want to do. You have to be very specific. And the problem is that when you throw out these very general, emotional statements, you're going to get backlash. So when you look at the flow of people that have come into Europe, the first thing you have to consider is single, military-age Muslim males. Okay, if you want to, stabilize your country, you should be there fighting for your country. But when you bring these individuals in, first and foremost, that's the Trojan horse. It opens you up to have those bad elements, which we have seen in Paris and Brussels. That's how they got into Europe. This mass migration, they were passed right in, not vetted, and now we have countless amounts of cells that are there. So I think that's one of the very specific policies we need to look at. We need to look at immigration that is coming from countries that are listed on terrorist watch lists. We need to look at countries that have established Islamic terrorist groups that are operating within their borders. I think there's nothing wrong with that. You go back and look at our student visa programs. 9/11, those individuals that were here based upon student visas. And so if you are coming from a country that is on that watch list or has a terrorist group that is operating within your borders, no, we're not going to grant student visas to you. I mean, and we have a very specific reason why. And then the other thing, something that I learned about, was this fiance visa program, which was the means by which Tasfeen Malik was able to get into this country. And the fact that we had no one that verified, as Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify, the residence that she put down on her application. If someone had done just that basic step, maybe those 14 people that were killed, 21 wounded in San Bernardino, would still be with us today.
Colonel, for a lot of years, it seems like the United States has taken on the role of being the so-called world police. Lately, there's been growing debate about the future relationship to be had between the United States and groups like NATO and the UN. What are your thoughts?
Well, one of the critical things that you have seen happen since World War II is, especially in Europe, we became the defense shield for Europe. Now, as Europe has gotten themselves their feet established and their economies back growing, they should have been taking more of a role as their security blanket. But what we have seen is that as the United States continued to be that security blanket as a part of NATO, as a part of the leading element against the Soviet Union, once the Soviet Union collapsed, we should have turned to the member nations of NATO and said, okay, enough of this spending most of your GDP on social welfare programs. You need to be standing up and defending yourselves. We should have had that transition. We cannot fully abdicate our role as a leader in the world. That's just what happens. And if you do abdicate that role and you create a vacuum, someone's going to fill that vacuum. And so we now see Russia seeking to fill that vacuum. I mean, look at the incursions that they've made in the Middle East. I mean, going into Syria, propping up Bashar al-Assad, when the President of the United States of America said Assad must go, and we drew this red line. Guess what? Neither one have come to fruition. And we see Iran now having more of a role. We see China having more of a role globally, especially looking at expanding their search for resources, being at minerals and also oil and gas resources. So someone's always going to step in and fill that void because, as the law of physics says, nature abhors a void. So I think that now is a time when we can look at collective security agreements such as NATO. We should look at entities such as the United Nations and say, are they viable as we move forward? But we have to take the leadership role in doing that and saying maybe there's a better way, not just abdicating our position.
Talking about Russia, what relationship should the next American president seek with Vladimir Putin?
Well, first and foremost, you have to understand that Vladimir Putin is former KGB, and so he is a tough guy. And when he said that his greatest disappointment in the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union, that should let you know something. And so when you see the incursions that have been made into, seizing the Crimea, and then what they have done, positioning themselves in the Ukraine, and then also against the borders of the Baltic states, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, that comes back to him realizing that there's a gap. There's a sign of weakness, and we have not focused on our strength, which is our military. And Ronald Reagan said, peace comes through strength. Peace does not come through, the perception of weakness. And I think that we have to have that military capability that is a deterrent. It's not that we're out there trying to be a bully to pick a fight, but we have to say, here are freedom's ramparts, and we're going to stand upon freedom's ramparts. And we're happy to work with you, and I think that we should be seeking how we could work with Russia, because they also have an Islamic jihadist program all along their southern areas. Chechnya is a hotbed for them. But the thing is, right now, we're not portraying that type of strength. I'll give you a great case in point. When President Obama was sitting on a stage, off-mic moment with then Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, and he said, tell Vladimir after re-election I'll have more flexibility. You don't tell a former KGB agent that in your re-election you'll have more flexibility. Look what has happened since this 2012 election.
Let's talk about Iran. In the New Iran deal.
We've made a horrible mistake with Iran. Iran is the #1 state sponsor of Islamic terrorism. When I sit and think about 10 U.S. Navy sailors on their knees at gunpoint, and then the Secretary of State, John Kerry, thanking them for taking care of our sailors. That's not the message you send to despots, dictators, and theocrats and autocrats. The fact that Iran, who has not signed anything in reference to this deal or this agreement, and they've had countless amounts of violations already, but yet we've been releasing billions of dollars to them. Billions of dollars is going to go to make sure that Hezbollah can continue to operate, and now they're in Syria. The Quds Force, which is a listed terrorist organization, they're operating in Syria. The Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is a designated terrorist organization, those were the ones who took our sailors captive out there in the Persian Gulf. So why would we believe that something's going to change with their behavior? And this is very Pavlovian. We have been rewarding them for all of this bad behavior, and we continue to get more bad behavior. Recently, toward the end of March, the Ayatollah Khamenei said that the future of Iran does not come through talks and negotiation. It comes with missiles. Well, supposedly in this nuclear deal, ballistic missiles are not supposed to be acquired, tested, or anything by Iran, as per a UN resolution, for 8 years. They've already violated that. They're looking to purchase brand new T-90 tanks from Russia. They're looking to purchase state-of-the-art fighter jets and the new S-300 surface-to-air anti-aircraft system. If they get that S-300 system, that provides them a blanket of protection that it will make it really hard to strike any type of nuclear facility that they're developing.
Sometimes overlooked because everything else going on in the world is problems we face with North Korea and the threats we face from their proven to be irrational leader.
The little pudgy guy.
How do we respond to them test firing missiles and making outrageous threats against the United States?
Well, the thing is that the person that controls the leash of that rabid dog is China. And when China sees that, we're going to do whatever we want. We're going to build islands in the South China Sea, put airstrips on it, and put military fortifications on these islands. We're going to continue to do what we're doing, shorting you through our trade and other things, and the cyber attacks. So China turns over to little Kim and says, do whatever you want. We really don't care. And Kim Jong-un is working with Iran as well, not just with the ballistic missile systems, but also with nuclear development. Remember that Israel struck a facility in Syria where the North Koreans were working with the Syrians on nuclear development. So what you see happening is we started out talking about these non-state actors, the Islamic jihadists, but you have state actors out there that also realize this is an opportunity. So you have Iran, you have Russia, you have China, you have North Korea. And so the only way to respond is strengthen our economy, standing up to China, and then they will have to, eventually stand up and get North Korea under control. And we have to show to Japan, and we also have to show to South Korea that we are a willing ally.
So a lot of people still feel that the American economy is weak and vulnerable, and that under President Obama, it's been a faux recovery. We're here at the National Center for Policy Analysis. You're settled in. You're doing some great work here. Tell me the top policy reforms the United States needs to make to get our economy jump-started again for job creation, growing businesses, and overall economic expansion.
Oh, one of the first things you have to look at tax reform, because the most important thing is that the resources that are necessary for small business and production and manufacturing to grow in the United States of America are being usurped and taken by the federal government. So, one of the things we've been looking at, flat tax, fair tax, we just want to have a tax system that enables the small business owner that operates subchapter S, LLC, to be able to go out and grow a business. And part of that tax reform being that, the personal income tax reform, because that's the small business side, and also the corporate business tax reform, we've got to start looking at how we streamline that. How do we get rid of all of these, really excessive deductions and all of this? We have a tax code that I think is close to 72,000 pages. I mean, it's a tax code that was so confusing that the former, chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Charlie Rangel in New York, he couldn't figure it out, and he got in trouble with it. So if the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, had trouble with the tax code, then guess what? Everyday, Americans are struggling with. And then when you look at corporate business tax reform, there's a thing out there called inversions. Our tax policy of forcing our corporations and business to leave. And when they leave, guess what happens? They take away jobs and opportunities for Americans, and they go elsewhere. Now, there are some people saying they're really bad corporations, but let's kind of put the cart before the horse. The reason why they're leaving is because we have folks that don't say America is open for business. So it's regulatory reform. We came in with Dodd-Frank when all we had to do, I think, is go back to the Glass-Steagall, which kept that separation between commercial and investment banks. Crony capitalism is what really is hurting America. And this idea that the government can get involved as a venture capitalist using taxpayer dollars. So when you trace back to 1978, the Community Reinvestment Act, Jimmy Carter, where he basically said every American has a right to own a home. Look at what we just heard the President Obama say: every American has a right to health care. Bernie Sanders: health care is a human right. Well, when you start to make those statements and those comments, then how do you fund that new right? And that's where we get ourselves in trouble. That's why we have $19 trillion in debt growing. That's why we're starting to see our deficits creep back up. People are estimating we'll be right back to 2020 $1 trillion deficit. So tax reform, regulatory reform, that's how we help to grow the economy. But the other side is, how do we get things under control in Washington, D.C.? So you have to have budgetary reform. When you look at the budget of the United States of America, one side is discretionary spending, the other side is mandatory spending. 64% of the budget of the United States of America is spent on the mandatory side, which no one's touching. That's your Medicare, that's your Medicaid, that's your Social Security, your net interest on the debt. We've got to fix that. And we have to have reforms to those systems, or else our budget is going to run off the rails. And the discretionary side, on the other side, we've got to get that under control. The growth of government, the growth of the bureaucratic administrative state that is out there creating regulations ad nauseum, ad infinitum to have an economic impact on people. So how do we reduce the size and scope of the federal government? The most important responsibility of the federal government is to provide for the common defense, not provide welfare to people. But yet we see the expansion of poverty, we see the expansion of people on food stamps. So one of the things that we look at here is, how do we move away from what is called baseline budgeting, which means that every year the federal government is going to increase their budget. When they talk about cutting spending, they're cutting the rate of the increase. That's what a baseline budget does. And you can always talk to people who work in the government. When it gets down to those last couple of months of a fiscal year, guess what they're told? You got to spend the money. Because if you don't spend the money, how are we going to justify getting more money in the next budget? So we got to transition that. I think that going to a zero budget, a zero base budget is a better idea. Well, you got to start with zero every year. You got to justify these programs. And the other thing that you have to do is better spending discipline. We have 12 appropriations bills up in Washington, D.C. Which is the priority? That's the key thing. So someone needs to talk to the American people about what's the priority of spending in the federal government. So I think that if we can get those things under control and get people to realize Washington, D.C. is not the center of the universe for the American economy. Our GDP growth is anemic. 2.1% annualized GDP growth over these past 7 or so years. That can't be the new normal. And if that is the new normal, Sawyer, then what are we doing for your future?
It's true. It's going to be on my generation to pay down that astonishing debt. And the dollar is not what it used to be. How do we return to sound money? How do we get back to that?
I think that what you see happening, just recently we had Janet Yellen. Janet Yellen is really the one determining our economy. And I think that's a very bad thing when one person, everything goes based upon what she says. If we truly had a free market, free enterprise economy, it wouldn't matter what Janet Yellen says. It wouldn't matter if she says, yeah, we're going to tick it up 0.25%, and we're going to tick it up 1%, because everyone knows that we have solid investment, we have solid production manufacturing, we have solid job growth. If you think that the unemployment rate in the United States of America is less than 5%, I got some great farmland to sell you back down in Florida, because they've changed the denominator. all of these people, 93, 94 million people who are out of work, who are, just dropped out of the workforce, they don't count them. And so you can put out that false number. And Janet Yellen can sit back and say that we're going to continue to print more money so that we can buy up our own debt with this horrific monetary policy. I mean, that is the self-licking ice cream cone. And it does not get us to where we need to be. It's an artificial economy. And eventually that bubble's going to burst just the same as it did with the mortgage industry. When everyone in government was going out touting, home ownership is skyrocketing, everything's great, unicorns and rainbows, and look what happened.
What policy changes are needed to provide real support to our veterans?
One of the key things is that you have to break the union bureaucratic hold of the Veterans Administration system. I think that first and foremost, you need to have more veterans and middle and upper level management of the Veterans Administration system and not government bureaucrats that are interested in giving themselves their own bonuses while we have veterans that are dying on waiting lists that they create. And so I think that top to bottom, you need to relook that. I think that you need to give veterans the choice. And we're not talking about, a whole bunch of people in the United States of America. We're talking about less than 3%. And if we can't do what's right for less than 3% of this country, what does that say about us? And the other thing is that if this is what government-controlled healthcare really looks like, then what Bernie Sanders is trying to sell, what the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act is trying to sell, this is going to end up in a catastrophe because of what we see happening with our vets. When you say that you're going to give the veterans the choice card and you're going to create a law enabling them to go out and be able to go to any hospital that they want, but then you make it so onerous for them to be able to get through that. You create the bureaucracy, the paperwork and everything so that the veterans say it's not worth it. And then you come back and say, well, you know what, they're not using this choice card thing, so we don't think this is a very viable program. Well, you made so many obstacles for veterans to use it. When you look at how many people are in the military, we have doctors in the military, we have medical service corps, hospital administrators. You can go to Fort Sam Houston, you can go to Fort Hood, Fort Bragg, you can go to any, Marine Corps base, naval installation. You have a military hospital there. When those individuals transition out of the military, guess where we should be recruiting them to go? Into the Veterans Administration system. They know how to make the system work. They know how to take care of veterans. They are veterans themselves.
Okay, Colonel, a few rapid-fire questions. Just answer with the first word or phrase that comes to mind. Benghazi.
Abandonment and despicable.
Black Lives Matter.
All lives matter.
Obamacare.
Failure.
Second Amendment.
All right.
Well, Colonel, you put yourself out there in the American public policy debate. You put yourself out there in the past in American politics, and you certainly put yourself out there on the battlefield. And I think the first word that comes to my mind is brave and courageous when I think of you. And I want to tell our audience, if you haven't yet, receive your copy of Guardian of the Republic and further read about Colonel West's vision for America and himself. And want to thank you for watching again.
Well, thank you so much, Sawyer. And again, it warms my heart, the great history that you and I have going back to South Florida to be able to sit here with you. And when you talk about being brave, I'm just following along the footsteps of those great 56 men who back in 1776 signed their names to a document so we can have this great country. This country was established by people who were brave and courageous. And we just need to find that within each and every one of ourselves to make sure that we pass on a better country to your generation.
God bless you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.